Jake froze in place, mouth slightly open, as a flower girl tossed rose petals across his backyard. White chairs. A full-blown wedding arch. A catering crew setting up silver platters. And a DJ testing speakers by his fence. What the hell? He blinked hard, hoping it was some weird dream brought on by too much late-night pizza. But no, this was very real. His carefully maintained, privately owned backyard had been transformed overnight into a wedding venue. And right in the middle of it all, wearing a smug smile and a pastel power suit, stood Karen Baxter, the tyrannical president of the neighborhood HOA. Jake stormed outside, voice cutting through the hum of chatter and clinking glassware. Karen! What the hell is going on in my yard? Karen turned slowly, like a queen deigning to address a peasant. Oh, Jake! You're up! We were beginning to think you'd missed the whole ceremony. He stared at her, stunned. Ceremony? This is my backyard. Karen waved a dismissive hand. Yes, we know. But the HOA voted this was the best available location for my niece's wedding. You really should take it as a compliment. Jake's eyes scanned the chaos. A bartender was unloading crates of champagne on his porch. Children were stomping through his tulips. Someone had literally parked a porta-potty in his driveway. I never approved this, Jake said coldly. You're trespassing. Karen's smile hardened. Jake, don't be so selfish. This is a community event. Page 4 of the newsletter? We sent out notices. And per Section 7B of the HOA regulations, any common space deemed underutilized can be repurposed. This isn't common space, he snapped. This is my private property. Karen crossed her arms and leaned in close. Her voice dropped low enough that only he could hear. You really want to start a fight today? On my niece's wedding day? You do that, and I'll make sure the HOA fines stack so high you won't see your lawn for months. Unkempt hedges. Decorative violations. Vehicle storage infractions. You name it. Jake's jaw tightened. He had dealt with her petty threats for years. But this wasn't a noise complaint or a mailbox color dispute. This was personal. She had invaded his home, and wrapped it in enough bureaucratic garbage to make herself look untouchable. He took a deep breath, turning toward the house. You've made a mistake, Karen. Karen smiled triumphantly. No, Jake. You're the one who's made a scene. He didn't respond. Just walked calmly back into his house and closed the door behind him. But inside, his mind was racing. She thought she could walk all over him. That he'd grumble, maybe call the cops, and then sit back down and take it. But this time, she'd gone too far. Jake set down his coffee, walked into the garage, and stared at the old sprinkler system buried under dust. It hadn't worked in years, not since the city changed out the water line, but the pipes were still there. Still connected. Still full of something truly foul. A slow, vengeful smile crept across his face. If Karen wanted a wedding in his yard, then she'd get one. Just not the one she expected. Jake sat in the garage, surrounded by old tools and rusted parts, staring at the ancient control box that powered the original sprinkler system. It was a relic from a time before he'd upgraded to drip irrigation, when the city still ran water through iron pipes so old, the water that came out of them smelled like pennies and swamp mud. He popped the panel open. A few wires were frayed, the dial stuck, but with a little work, he could make it sing. And what it would spray wouldn't just be water, it would be decades-old, sediment-heavy sludge. Exactly what a white dress wedding didn't want. He was just starting to reconnect the wiring when his phone buzzed. It was Tom. Tom was one of the only sane people left on the HOA board. He'd always kept a low profile to avoid Karen's wrath, but when things got out of hand, Tom was the one who slipped Jake quiet warnings about upcoming votes or new fines. Jake picked up. Jake, Tom sighed. I just heard. Is it true she's hosting a wedding on your property? Jake stood up, wiping grease off his hands. Not hosting. Hijacking. It looks like a scene from Bridal Monthly back here. I didn't give any permission. Didn't even get a heads up. Tom groaned. I figured. Listen. I wasn't at the board meeting where this was approved, but I started asking around. And you're not gonna like what I found. Try me. Karen blew the HOA's entire event budget last quarter. Personal stuff, contractors for her kitchen remodel, landscaping for her yard, even a spa retreat that she claimed was a wellness planning session. Jake rolled his eyes. Of course she did. So when her niece's wedding started coming up, and people asked what venue we were renting with the budget, she panicked. Said the HOA would be offering a scenic outdoor location instead. And by scenic, she meant my backyard. Exactly. She cooked up some nonsense about community utility space and bulldozed anyone who objected. Jake exhaled slowly. Thanks, Tom. I was already mad, but now I've got a reason to go nuclear. I didn't hear that, Tom said quickly. But if something were to go wrong at this wedding, I might look the other way. Jake hung up with a grim smile. Then he got back to work. By early afternoon, everything was in motion. The DJ was testing sound levels again, too loud. A flock of bridesmaids were fluttering around in matching pastel dresses, taking selfies under the arch Karen had planted near his vegetable beds. A long buffet table was now spread out across the patio where Jake usually grilled ribs in the summer. He was watching from the kitchen window, double-checking the sprinkler control box one last time, when someone knocked on the front door. He opened it to find a young man in a rented tux, hair slicked back, looking like he hadn't slept in 2 days. You must be Jake, the guy said awkwardly. I'm, David. The groom. Jake narrowed his eyes. You do realize your wedding is happening in someone else's backyard without permission, right? David winced. Yeah. About that. I just found out this morning. Karen told us the venue was a private estate the HOA had reserved. I didn't know it was your house. I'm really sorry, man. Jake crossed his arms. So you're marrying Karen's niece? Was. I mean, probably still am. Hopefully. I dunno. David rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I'm not trying to justify anything. But I just wanted to say, I get why you're pissed. If this were happening at my place, I'd be setting things on fire. Jake smirked. Not a bad idea. David chuckled nervously, then turned serious. But if you are planning something, maybe don't go too hard on Steph. My fiancée. She didn't know either. Karen's been steamrolling everyone in this wedding. Steph wanted something small, just close family. Then her mom got involved and suddenly it turned into this circus. Jake looked at the guy a moment. He seemed sincere. Lost, maybe, but definitely not entitled. I'll keep that in mind, Jake said. But I'm not letting this slide. Fair enough, David said, nodding. Just, if things go down, I won't stop you. Jake watched him walk back down the path toward the backyard mayhem. Then he looked up at the sky, sunny, cloudless, perfect wedding weather. Not for long. He walked back into the garage and stared at the old sprinkler dial. With a flip of a switch, he could make the entire setup erupt in muddy disaster. But the key was timing. He wasn't going to spoil the setup. No, he'd wait. Wait until every guest was seated. Until the DJ hit play. Until the bride was about to walk down that aisle. And then? Showtime. Real quick, if you've ever had a neighbor who thought your property was theirs to control. Please comment number 1 so everyone knows you've been there too. The air smelled like flowers and overpriced perfume. Guests milled around the backyard, dressed in pastel suits and lace dresses, clinking champagne glasses and nibbling on miniature crab cakes as if they were in a rented vineyard and not someone else's stolen property. Jake watched it all unfold through his living room window, sipping lukewarm coffee with one hand and hovering the other over the switch to the sprinkler system. His heart pounded, not with nerves, but with sheer anticipation. Karen strutted through the yard like a celebrity on a red carpet. Her voice, grating and overly sweet, echoed across the space as she welcomed guests, posed for photos, and directed vendors with all the grace of a power-hungry dictator. Jake noticed her glance at his house once, just once. A passing flick of her eyes, like she was checking to make sure the problem had been neutralized. She hadn't even bothered to gloat. That's how confident she was. Perfect. The DJs switched tracks to something soft and classical. Guests began moving toward the rows of white chairs. The flower girl had taken her position near the back gate. A pair of teenage boys tested their camera drones above the crowd, trying to get cinematic shots, as one of them put it. The buzz of their little rotors whined just above the clinking of cutlery. Jake cracked his knuckles. Almost time. He glanced at the control panel one more time. The ancient sprinkler system was primed and humming softly. The pressure was building. The old rusty water had been sitting in those pipes for over a decade, full of minerals, sludge, and the occasional insect that had crawled too far in. He had tested one head earlier. It spat out a brown, foul-smelling stream that could stain cement. He couldn't wait to see what it would do to white chiffon. Jake leaned in. Listened. The DJ's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the bride." Jake's eyes narrowed. He waited a beat. Then click. At first, no one noticed the low gurgling sound underfoot. The bride's processional music swelled, masking the first sputters. And then chaos. All at once, every sprinkler head in Jake's backyard exploded to life. But instead of a graceful mist of water, thick jets of brown, rusty, foul-smelling sludge burst into the air, drenching the front rows of guests in seconds. Shrieks tore through the ceremony. A woman in a lilac dress screamed as a stream hit her square in the back. A man in a linen suit tried to dive out of the way, only to land in a puddle of black ooze. The flower girl burst into tears. The expensive white chairs tipped over like dominoes. The custom floral arrangements drooped instantly under the weight of the fall water, wilting into soggy, brown-streaked messes. And then came the bride. Stephanie, wide-eyed and glowing, stepped into the yard just as a sprinkler directly in front of her erupted. A geyser of sludge splashed up and over her perfectly tailored gown, soaking the hem in dark orange filth. She gasped, tripped backward, and fell, right into the mud. Karen's scream cut across the mayhem. "Turn it off! Turn it off right now!" Vendors ran around, shouting at each other. The DJ's speakers hissed and popped before shorting out completely. A champagne tower near the buffet table collapsed as someone tripped into it. One of the drones dropped from the sky, crashing into the dessert bar in a spray of chocolate mousse and panic. Jake stepped outside, cool and calm, arms crossed on his porch like a man admiring his own fireworks display. Karen spotted him instantly and stormed through the muck, her designer heels sinking into the mud. "You!" she screeched, her voice cracking. "What did you do?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Looks like your venue has plumbing problems. Should have gone with a professional space instead of stealing someone's backyard." Karen's face twisted with fury. "You ruined my niece's wedding!" Jake tilted his head. "No, Karen. You did that the moment you decided to stage an entire event on private property without permission." The guests were now gathering in small clumps, wiping their clothes and trying to clean off. Cameras and phones were out. People were filming everything. And then, Stephanie. Her wedding dress was ruined. Mascara ran down her cheeks. She stared at her mother, soaked and shaking. "You said this was a real venue," she choked out. "You told me everything was paid for. Booked. You lied to me," Karen faltered. "Honey, I just thought." "You used someone's backyard without asking?" Stephanie shouted. "Why would you do that?" "I had to. There was no budget left and Karen stopped herself, realizing she'd said too much. Jake didn't miss a beat. He turned toward the crowd. "Funny thing about that. Karen used the HOA's event budget to pay for her own landscaping and vacations. This wedding wasn't just illegal, it was a cover-up." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the vendors froze. David stepped forward, his tux stained and shoes soaked. "Is that true?" he asked quietly, looking between Jake and Karen. Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Jake crossed his arms. Go ahead. Tell them it's not true. Tell your daughter. Tell your board. But Karen couldn't. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. And in that moment, the last of her fake authority shattered. David looked at Stephanie, then at the swamp around them. You know, he said. I thought we were just getting a little over our heads. But this is insane. Stephanie blinked at him, her expression cracking. I don't think I can do this, David said. Not just today. This whole thing, your mom, the lies, the manipulation, it's too much. I can't marry into this. No, Stephanie whispered. Please. But David just shook his head and walked away. Karen reached out, but he didn't even look back. The guests slowly started to leave. Some still in shock. Others whispering, already passing judgment. Karen stood motionless in the middle of the mess, her kingdom literally sinking beneath her heels. Jake turned back toward the house, content. He didn't need to say anything else. The damage was done. Karen stood frozen in the center of Jake's swampy yard, her once flawless outfit soaked and stained with brown streaks of mud and sprinkler sludge. Her hair clung to her face in wet clumps, mascara running like war paint. Around her, the last of the guests were fleeing, high heels in hand, tuxedos dripping, voices raised in angry complaint. The wedding was over. And everyone knew exactly who to blame. Jake lingered on his porch, arms crossed, soaking in the chaos like sunshine on a cold day. The smell was atrocious, the damage was everywhere, and yet it had never felt more peaceful. Then Tom arrived. He didn't walk across the lawn, he wisely approached from the driveway, careful to avoid the worst of the mess. His expression was grim, but there was a spark of satisfaction behind his eyes. Karen, he called, voice louder than usual. We need to talk. Karen turned sharply. Not now, Tom, she snapped, her voice still shrill but hoarse from yelling. Yes. No, he said firmly, stepping closer. I've just gotten off the phone with 3 other board members. We've reviewed the HOA accounts, and let's just say, there are a few curious charges. Karen's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Tom pulled a folded sheet from his pocket and held it up. Landscaping services for a property not owned by the HOA. Spa expenses listed under mental wellness for board leadership. And this one's my favorite, a catered luncheon for 2 labeled as a community strategic planning session, held at a winery. Gasps came from the few remaining vendors and neighbors within earshot. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. This is ridiculous. It was all approved. I have receipts. We're going to need those, Tom said. Because as of this moment, we're initiating a full audit. And you're suspended from your position as HOA president until it's complete. Karen took a step back, slipping slightly in the mud. You can't do that. We can, and we already did. Emergency vote. Unanimous. Karen's lips trembled. This is all Jake's fault. Everyone's eyes turned to Jake, who hadn't moved from his perch on the porch. He gave her a little wave. Hi. You sabotaged this event, Karen shrieked. You ruined everything. My niece's wedding. My reputation. Jake smiled faintly. Karen, you did all that on your own. I just provided the lighting. Tom stepped in again. The police have also been notified. Misappropriation of community funds is a serious matter. I suggest you find a lawyer. As if on cue, the sound of a patrol car engine echoed from the street. Karen whipped her head around as a black and white cruiser rolled to a stop in front of her house. 2 officers stepped out, one holding a notepad, the other scanning the scene with a raised brow. Karen visibly paled. I didn't do anything illegal, she shouted, voice rising again. This was all a misunderstanding. The officer approached calmly. Ma'am, we received reports about an unauthorized event on private property and possible financial misconduct involving an HOA organization. We'll need to ask you a few questions. If this made you smile even just a little, go ahead and like the video and share it with someone who really needs to see Karen get what's coming. Karen's voice faltered as she stammered for an explanation. But the damage was done. The guests were gone. The vendors were furious. The wedding was a disaster. And now, the law was knocking, literally, on her front door. Tom turned to Jake as the officers led Karen toward the driveway. "Well," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "I guess it all came crashing down faster than I expected." Jake let out a breath. "Felt like it was building up for years. You know," Tom added with a smirk, "we're holding an emergency HOA meeting tomorrow night. Vote to dissolve the whole thing. Karen's implosion kinda opened the floodgates, no pun intended." Jake chuckled. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Tom gave him a friendly clap on the shoulder before heading off. Jake stood there for a moment longer, watching as the officers talked to Karen at the edge of the road. She was waving her arms, arguing, but no one was really listening anymore. The authority she once wielded like a weapon was gone. And just like that, the queen of the HOA was dethroned. The next morning, Jake stood in his backyard, hands on his hips, surveying the wreckage of what had once been a picture-perfect wedding setup, and what was now a battlefield. The white chairs were toppled and stained beyond redemption. Shredded flower petals clung to patches of mud. The once pristine arch had collapsed sideways, now resembling the skeletal remains of some forgotten garden ruin. Bits of broken glassware and soggy napkins littered the grass, and the overwhelming stench of rust and sludge still hung in the air. But despite the mess, Jake felt incredible. For the first time in years, he felt like he had finally taken his home back. No Karen. No passive-aggressive notices taped to his door. No threats of HOA fines for leaving his trash bin out an hour too long. Just peace. He took a sip from his fresh cup of coffee and walked toward his porch, savoring the cool breeze rolling through the trees. His phone buzzed, a text from Tom. "HOA meeting tonight. Final vote to disband. Bring snacks. This one's gonna be fun." Jake grinned. He would bring popcorn. As he sat down on the porch steps, he heard a car pulling into his driveway. Turning his head, he spotted David stepping out, still dressed casually but with less of the dazed panic from the day before. "Thought you'd skip town," Jake said, raising his cup. David chuckled. "Almost did. Figured I owed you a proper thank you before I disappeared." Jake shrugged. "I didn't exactly do it for you." "I know," David said, nodding. "But still, you saved me from making the worst mistake of my life. And you definitely saved Stephanie from a lifetime of pretending her mom wasn't a monster." Jake smirked. "Tough way to find out the truth." "Yeah," David agreed. "But better now than 10 years in with a mortgage, 3 kids, and Karen calling every Sunday demanding we repaint our mailbox." They both laughed. David looked around the wrecked yard, whistling low. "You ever think about renting this place out for actual weddings?" Jake gave him a look. "I'd sooner set it on fire." "Fair," David said with a grin. "Well, I'm off. Moving back to Seattle. Clean break. Just wanted to say thanks. And hey, if you're ever in Washington, look me up. I owe you a drink." Jake nodded. "I'll hold you to that." David climbed back into his car and drove off, disappearing down the street just as another moving van passed in the opposite direction. Jake glanced across the road. Karen's house. The windows were shuttered. The yard overgrown. A for sale sign stood tilted near the curb. He sipped his coffee again, slowly, letting the moment sink in. She was really gone. As the sun crept higher over the rooftops, Jake leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs out with a satisfied sigh. For once, the neighborhood was quiet. Peaceful. His. And if the HOA vote went the way he expected tonight, it would stay that way for a very, very long time. If you think Karen got what she deserved, just hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Sometimes standing your ground is the most powerful thing you can do. Jake's story reminds us that there's a limit to what we should tolerate, even when the people pushing boundaries hide behind rules, titles, or polite smiles. Karen used authority to manipulate and control, believing no one would dare challenge her. But when someone finally said enough is enough, the whole illusion crumbled. In life, it's easy to let small injustices slide, hoping they'll go away. But when boundaries are repeatedly crossed, silence becomes permission. Jake didn't just defend his yard, he defended his right to peace, privacy, and dignity. And in doing so, he inspired his entire community to see the truth. The lesson? Don't be afraid to speak up, even when you stand alone. Integrity, patience, and the courage to push back, especially when it's uncomfortable, can bring real change. Sometimes the most satisfying justice isn't loud or violent. Sometimes it's just a quiet man, holding a coffee cup, watching karma do its job.